Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, if you haven't noticed by now, or if you're new, this channel is centered around the idea of a traditional hero, and I enter into analysis and examination of traditional heroes through pop culture and currently produced entertainment. And as I have pointed out many times, and many of you have pointed out in the comments many times, the origin point of the destruction of the traditional hero within entertainment today happened with deconstruction, the deconstruction of our heroes. And I think it quite appropriate if we wish to get back to traditional, real heroes and have them inspire us, we need to, in a sense, deconstruct deconstructionism. That'll probably be the title of this video, although that does sound a little bit awkward. But that's what I want to do today. I want to take at the very least one facet of this deconstruction and break it down to show you why it should never have been taken seriously to begin with. But just a quick note before I start, there is a link in the description for the sign-up page for my new books that are coming out. They're called Fade to Blue. They are a combination of film noir and Indiana Jones. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those in the background, and I think I'll mix in some art from upcoming projects as well. The manga that I'm working on, well, the comic that I'm working on with a manga artist, as well as some art from Thomas Valiant #2, which was one of my regular graphic novels. So our schedule is for all of these to come out in 2025. So if you're interested at all in Fade to Blue, please go on over to the sign up page and leave your email address, and you will be informed via email when the project goes live. But back to our topic. Now, I started thinking about deconstruction and how it has destroyed our heroes and our stories after watching a series of videos over the last week talking about the sickness of our societies. Now, first off, these videos were about psychology, and if you know anything about me, you know that I don't put a whole lot of stock in psychology. They're basically just rediscovering, or in their minds, discovering things about the human nature and the human soul and the human psyche that the ancients and the medievals knew for millennia through logic and philosophy and theology. But at the very least, it does bring some modern language to ancient problems, and those are the problems we face as trying to understand how to live as authentic human beings and how to build up our character. And as such, that does translate onto the page of how to build up characters and how to tell stories. And in looking at the ways which we as human beings fail to build up our character, fail to live authentic human lives, we can see how characters on a page also fail. And part of this is indeed the deconstruction of our heroes that we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years minimum. It is a failure to consider the true character of humanity. It is a failure to consider our human nature as it exists within reality. So again, I entered into this entire discussion in my head by listening to videos about how, according to psychology, most of our, if not all of our, societies in the West are on the borderline. And what she meant by that was the fact that our societies basically look like an individual with borderline personality disorder. And I would say that's probably true because of the vast majority of people, individuals within each of our societies, which look like they have borderline personality disorder. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'll give you my 2 cents at the very beginning. And my 2 cents is the fact that, as I've said many times on this channel, and as philosophy and theology over the millennia have gone over, mankind is basically a pattern recognition creature, a pattern recognition machine, as it were. We work best through pattern recognition, and as such, we seek the stability of pattern recognition. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that our brains, and again, I would say our souls and our psyche as well, work best when they have certainty and thrive when they have certainty. And as such, our brains have defense mechanisms against uncertainty, especially uncertainty that comes from difficult emotions. Now, those defense mechanisms of our brain, in order to deal with uncertainty and difficult emotions, are usually broken down into 2 separate categories. There is the immature way that our brain can defend itself, and the mature way that our brain can defend itself. The immature way is classified as being short-term gain at the expense of long-term pain, whereas the mature way of dealing with it would be quite the opposite. Short-term pain in order to have long-term gain. And these personality disorders emerge from individuals, and indeed societies, acting in a way wherein they rely over and over again on the immature defense mechanisms in order to defend themselves against instability and emotional upheaval. And when these immature defense mechanisms started to be described to me, it sounded like someone was describing modern entertainment systems and the people within those systems who control those systems and run them and do the creative work as well. Now, these immature defense mechanisms are usually, as I've run across them, split into 3 different categories or subcategories, being splitting, projection, and idealization. Honestly, I think that projection and idealization might simply be subcategories of splitting, but I'll go over splitting and do it very briefly, tying in connections with what I see going on within our entertainment systems. So a simplified definition of splitting is a term used in psychiatry to describe the inability to hold opposing thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. Some might say that a person who splits sees the world in terms of black and white, all or nothing. It's a distorted way of thinking in which the positive or negative attributes of a person or event are neither weighed nor cohesive. Now, that'll take a little bit of explaining first off, because you might be saying to yourself, isn't that what you do all the time, RJ? You break things down into black and white? But it's the second part of the statement that's really important. It's the breaking down of things into black and white without the ability or without engaging the ability to critically think about your judgment as to whether they're black or white. That is why it's neither weighed nor cohesive. In a logical form of understanding things, in order to make a judgment, in order to say whether something is black or white, you need to weigh all of the considerations, even if they're opposing thoughts or feelings or beliefs, to weigh them, to consider them critically, to see how they fit together cohesively, and then make the judgment of whether it's black or white. But splitting is simply chopping the thing into saying, this is black, this is white, without any of that critical thinking taking place. And that's why it's considered a distorted way of thinking. But if we get back to the definition, and as we go farther, you'll see how this is connected with modern systems of entertainment, because it continues. Splitting is common with those who have borderline personality disorder. Splitting is considered a defense mechanism by which people with borderline personality disorder view others, events, or even themselves in all or nothing terms. Splitting allows them to readily discard things they have assigned as quote-unquote bad and to embrace things that they consider quote-unquote good, even if those things are harmful or risky. What makes splitting all the more confusing is that the belief can sometimes be ironclad or shift back and forth from one moment to the next. People who split are often seen to be overly dramatic or overwrought, especially when declaring that things have either, quote, completely fallen apart or, quote, completely turned around. Such behavior can be exhausting to those around them. And it starts to get into the nitty-gritty when it says the following. By itself, splitting may seem almost commonplace, a behavior easily attributed to any number of individuals we know, or maybe even ourselves. However, splitting in borderline personality disorder is considered a consistent and distorted behavior, usually accompanied by other symptoms, such as, and here's where we get into the list of commonalities between such people and the people who run our entertainment. Number 1, acting out. That is to say, acting without consideration to consequences. How many times have you witnessed someone creating a product and then going on social media and acting out in a way that is simply destroying the product? We see it right now with Snow White. Rachel Ziegler, I think her name is, cannot keep her mouth shut. And all she's doing is slowly but surely destroying any hope that this movie had of making any money. The same can be said with comics and video games. We go back to comics. Statements like Kelly Sue DeConnick saying, if you don't like my politics, don't buy my books. This is not a considered statement as to the consequences of what you're going to do to sales. This is acting out. Number 2 on this list is denial, or consciously ignoring a fact of reality. And again, we see this over and over and over again within entertainment, especially within the constant attempts to control the narrative. Things like artificially altering scores on Rotten Tomatoes, getting rid of the dislike button on YouTube so people can't see that they've been downvoted in a massive way, barring people from Comic-Cons, making sure that certain people cannot speak. For comics, one of those things would be getting rid of the hard numbers for sales so that the public no longer has access to those numbers, and thus they can then claim that they're doing very well. This is all denial of reality, denial of the facts of reality. Number 3 on this list is emotional hypochondriasis. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's basically hypochondria, but for your emotions. constantly trying to get other people to see your emotional pain. Whereas a normal hypochondriac would say, look at me, look at how sick I am, even if they have to make up sicknesses. The people in this category do the same thing, but it's look how emotionally sick I am. And again, I would say, after listening to years and years of Marvel podcasts, this is one of the main staples of how people introduce themselves at Marvel Comics and Marvel Entertainment and Disney. It's, I have these emotional problems. This is me. Number 4 on the list is omnipotence, or the belief that the person possesses superior intellect or power. And I think we've all witnessed this in one form or another with people saying, I know better than you. I have superior knowledge, perhaps secret knowledge, that you don't have access to. I've certainly seen it, again, within the Marvel podcast, within the Marvel panels at Comic-Cons, where they're asked direct questions about the failure of comics and the insertion of certain kinds of ideology into it and whether there's a connection. And the pat answer is, well, you don't have access to all the knowledge. We know better. And these things are not failing. Again, denying reality. Number 5 in the list is being passively aggressive. That is to say, indirectly expressing hostility. And again, I think all of us have witnessed this, especially on social media, how if you have anything that contradicts the narrative of the entertainment machines, you're automatically labeled as an hysterophobe of one kind or another. And as such, must be barred from events and even social media at times. This leads right into the next one on the list, which is projection, or assigning undesirable emotions of yourself to someone else. Again, we see this all the time, not just within the entertainment system, but within the left in general, especially the far left. They're projecting their insecurities and their failures onto other people and then trying to condemn them. And then we get into the other opposite form of projection, which is idealization, which is to say, to project onto another all the idealized things that you are missing, and then to cling to that idealized illusion as the savior, that is to say, the emotionally balanced part of you that you cling to in order to emotionally balance you. And those last two, those different forms of projection, is where we get into entertainment as a storytelling system and into deconstruction. Because I could talk all day about how splitting is something they do on the far left, usually the left in general, all the time. The idea of we're on the right side of history and everyone who doesn't agree with us is a 1930s militaristic German. I could talk all day about idealization within the utopian mindset of the far left and the general left, wherein they project into the future this idealized version of what a society should be and cling to that even though there is no logical reason to do so, no factual reason to do so either, and thus in concentrating on it, they can justify all actions supposedly progressing towards it and ignore all of the faults. But again, since we're concentrating on storytelling and characters and heroes and deconstruction, we should focus simply on projection in first a negative, usually called projective identification, and then in a positive being projective idealization, sometimes just called idealization, within a system of storytelling. And besides that, if you were to look at a society as if they were an individual, a society would use storytelling as its means of projection. So let's look at idealization first. And if we look at most modern stories, we can see that they're a form of idealization. And that idealization is to take all of the best qualities that you are lacking in yourself, that you wish to have in order to have emotional stability, projecting them onto someone else, in this case, fictional characters, and saying, you see, things work out perfectly for them in this fictional world, therefore, they're a stabilizing force within my life itself, and thus help control my own emotional instability. Which, by the way, does not work. But that's how modern stories, over and over again, play out, especially within characters like Mary Sue's. These are idealized versions of the persons who are writing them. It's basically a way of these people who are psychologically disordered to construct a false reality, which is the story that they're creating, and a false image of themselves, which is the Mary Sue on the page, in order to convince themselves, falsely, that there is a reality wherein they can continue to deny reality and still come out on top. And once again, this is all done in order for them to try, in a very shallow, immature way, to regulate their own emotions and to stabilize their own lives, because neither of those things are present in their lives. And the thing is that the reason why heroes, especially true traditional heroes, need to be deconstructed is because a true traditional hero takes a sledgehammer to that entire thing. At its basis, the heart of splitting and projection and idealization and all of these other borderline personality disorder traits is a denial of reality. These people want a short-term gain of, I feel good about myself by denying reality, and in denying reality, that's where the long-term pain comes from. But a true traditional hero, as I'm always talking about, must have as its originating point not a denial of reality, but an acceptance and internalization of it. The basic concept of a true traditional hero that was expressed by Aristotle in the 4th century BC, him working off of stories, as I always say, as early as 1200 BC, is to categorize a true hero as a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are very specific in order and number. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. You must have each one of those to have the successive one of those. But in order to have prudence first, you must have right reason. And right reason is your reason in accord with reality. And right reason is diametrically opposed to the idea of splitting. Splitting, again, being a process whereby you judge something to be good or evil without consideration, without critical consideration. That is to say, without weighing whether it's real or cohesive. And again, another way of saying that is whether or not it conforms with the rules of reality. And this is why our heroes needed to be deconstructed. If these people want to create entertainment that is based upon a falsehood, and again, let's go back thousands of years to the definition of Aristotle, the logical definition of what a story is. A story is a representation of reality. But these people don't want to represent reality. They want to create false realities in order to make themselves feel like they have control of their uncontrollable situation or emotions. And thus heroes, especially the more complete paragons of virtue, heroes like Captain America, Superman, Galadriel, I would even include characters like Luke Skywalker, as he existed after the end of the first trilogy. All of these characters represent, at the very least, a different version of this true traditional hero, which, as I said, must be, if they are a true traditional hero, based upon these virtues as they proceed first from right reason, that is to say, a true consideration of reality. And of course, how does this deconstruction proceed? How did it proceed for the last, again, minimum 20 years? It proceeded in a way, first of all, that employed storytelling. Why? Because, once again, as Aristotle was common in saying, the easiest corruptible form of argumentation is a story. And from that, we see it is the destruction of true argumentation. True argumentation should be based upon logic. Logic is a consideration of reality before you make judgments whether or not something is right or wrong, good or evil. These are the basic steps of logic itself. Simple apprehension, judgment, reason, logic. And so, the process began with a corruption of logic itself, a corruption of argumentation. And that corruption has been around since mankind has been around. It is sophistry. And that sophistry is commonly seen in deconstruction in a way that they break the hero down into its component parts and then point out, hey, wait a second, this one component part is not heroic in itself, therefore it destroys the cohesiveness of the whole heroic person. This, of course, is a fallacy in logic, but again, in using stories, which is the easiest corruptible of argumentation, you can carry your audience along in order for you to deceive them into thinking that this is good argumentation. This fallacy, usually I would say the fallacy of composition or division, but they can use a number of different fallacies, a number of different logical errors in order to bring this into their argumentation of their storytelling. But this form of breaking down a hero into its component parts, which those component parts are not all heroic in themselves. Why? Because that's the way composition works. Sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But in doing such, in order for them to point out that this one point of the character can succumb to flaws which make it not heroic, is the deconstruction process of the hero themselves. Or, again, to put it in other terms, going back to the definition of splitting, it is taking something, a character, in this case, a heroic character, breaking it down into its component parts, which, when they are hero, are weighed and cohesive, but breaking them down into their component parts so that you can deliberately ignore the process of weighing each component part and seeing how it is cohesive with the others. And thus, being able to reverse engineer a way to declare the thing black or white, good or evil, and in this case, evil, in this case, non-heroic. Because, of course, the idea of hero destroys their ability to construct false realities. And so the real point is that if we wish our societies, and definitely our entertainment, to come back from the verge of tipping into wholehearted psychological sickness, we need not only to have true traditional heroes to keep us balanced, but we need to understand how and why deconstruction of our heroes never had any merit to begin with. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this, and don't forget, there is a link in the description in the pinned comment for the sign-up page for my new books which are coming out called Fade to Blue. They are a combination of film noir and Indiana Jones, thrown together with a dash of nitty-gritty, old-style comic fun. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on that link in the description and go on over and leave your email address so that you can be informed when the project goes live. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.